examples of both of those here shortly. And so the use case can be text. It can be numbered steps. So first you do this, and then this happens, and then you do this, and then this happens. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 kind of thing. Or sometimes you'll see a flow chart. It might be a flow chart with text or flow chart by itself. Any number of options of how this might look. But the basic idea is it's going to show some sequence of things that could occur. Now, the important thing, if you do get a flow chart, don't mistake a flow chart for a state diagram. We looked at state diagrams in a previous webinar, and so you might be thinking, oh, yeah, flow chart, state diagram, same thing. No, not quite, because in the flow chart, the boxes represent steps and sequences of things that are going to happen. And in the state transition diagram, you have these nodes, the bubbles or circles that represent states, and they're not necessarily the same thing. There might be some relationship in some cases depending on how the state diagram is drawn, but for the most part they are different. So you got your use case, and now what you're going to do is you're going to derive tests. And typically what you're going to do is say, okay, well, I want to cover all of the typical workflows, and I want to cover all of the exceptional workflows. And now this is where a little bit of combinational kind of technique combination stuff comes in, because a lot of times, use case is written at a very high level of abstraction. It's not very specific. In a test case, you want to be a little bit more specific. Now, how much more specific is something I'll get to in a minute, but you do generally want to be more specific in a test case than you would in the use case. So you might very well apply equivalence partitioning and boundary value analysis during the derivation of the tests, and I'll show you some examples of that here as we go along and show you a test derived from a use case. This makes the coverage criteria a little bit squishy for use cases. State diagrams and decision tables, we had very clearly defined coverage criteria for those, but for use cases, it's, as I said, it's squishier. You want to have at least one test per workflow. For each typical and for each exceptional workflow, you want to have a test. But if you're going to apply equivalence partitioning and or boundary value analysis to some of the typical or exceptional workflows, then that could very well generate 2 or more tests on the workflows, on any given workflow. And of course, this is limited only by your imagination as to how far to take this, as is always the case. And so that of course brings us back to this issue of risk, and risk-based testing, which is not the subject of this webinar, but certainly is something that you can and perhaps have heard a lot about from me before in previous webinars and videos and so forth. And if you're not familiar with the concept, take a minute at the end of this webinar to go to the digital library on the RBCS website. You can find some videos out there to give you some more ideas about risk-based testing, and also you can look at some of the articles on the articles page or the basic library page that will give you some more input on risk-based testing. So for our purposes here, an important thing to remember is that coverage criteria are not really formal. They're more of an informal kind of thing, and it requires a little bit of judgment, wisdom, experience from the tester to determine how far to take this. Now, what are we looking for? What kind of bugs are we looking for in testing based on use cases? Well, basically what we're looking for is a situation where a typical scenario or an exceptional scenario is mishandled. Now, mishandled could mean can't even get to the end of it. You try to do it and it just doesn't happen. It fails to complete. That's obviously the more catastrophic form. Another fairly catastrophic form would be you can get to the end of the flow, but the the thing that you were trying to accomplish, and the use case is always about accomplishing something. It's about doing something of value. That something of value that you were trying to complete ended up not being completed. So, that's, you're able to step through the sequence, but, nothing happened. I mean, imagine printing, right? So, if we look at the, we could have a use case for printing from an application. So one possible problem would be, the dialogue gives you an error in the midst of trying to complete the print. But it could also appear to work just fine, give you no error message at all, but nothing ever comes out of the printer. So those would be fairly, catastrophic from a point of view of no value delivered. And of course, there could be other bugs that you would find that would be perhaps peripheral to the use case. Maybe the printing happens, but the dialog boxes are really ugly, or there's a misspelling in a dialog box, or it takes longer than it's supposed to. Those are the kinds of bugs that we should be looking for. So you should be aware of many different kinds of bugs that can occur during your testing with use cases, and indeed, of course, during all testing. Just because you saw the expected result doesn't mean that you didn't also see a bug. So, in the case of these sort of peripheral kinds of issues, to go back to my print example, just because printed document came out at the end doesn't mean that there weren't bugs. And if you saw things like, misspellings, bad alignment of boxes, dialog boxes, slow performance, so forth, those should all be reported as problems. So let's take a look at an example of an informal use case here. This is for e-commerce application. I would expect this is something that would be familiar to a greater or lesser degree to all of you. So what's the normal thing that happens when you go shopping online? Well, you put stuff in shopping cart, and then at some point or another you decide to check out. At that point, the system is going to go through and gather up, your address information, where is it to be sent to, how you're going to pay. Of course, the vendor's going to want to get paid, and any sort of additional shipping information like, well, should it go express or 2-day, overnight, standard? Do you want to insure the package, that kind of stuff. So system's going to take you through a set of dialogues. And of course, this tends to be very unidirectional, as you all know, in the sense of, it's not unidimensional, it's deterministic. You go through a sequence of screens, and it's always this screen, then that screen, then this other screen, and then it's done. And you can go forward or backwards, but you can't really vary the order in which you see these screens in most cases. And then at that point, usually there's going to be some final customer confirmation step that occurs. So the screen comes up and you have to click confirm order or something. This is all pretty standard, and the user confirms the order, and then the system is going to have now basically initiate the order, and then other things are going to happen, right? There'll be confirmation email sent out, the box itself is sent out. But at this point, the